I'm going to tell you something that has literally revolutionized the entire field of neuroscience. You can change your brain. You can rewire and reprogram your brain with the choices that you make each day, no matter how old you are. You can physically and functionally transform your brain with things like diet, exercise, sleep, and even meditation. I'm Dr. Austin Perlmutter. I'm a board certified internal medicine physician, and today we're covering the powerful neuroscience of how to rewire and change your brain. Quick disclaimer, this is not medical advice, it's for general education purposes only. And if you're interested in this content, please subscribe to my channel. Until very recently, scientists believed that the adult brain was a relatively static organ. The basic idea was that your brain grew and developed during your childhood and then became relatively inflexible until it started to slowly decline in function when we reached around middle age. But this is no longer considered accurate. In fact, the idea that the brain is static in any sense has been fundamentally overturned by breakthrough discoveries in neuroscience just in the last couple of decades. Key to this reconceptualization of what the brain is capable of doing is the understanding of a term called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize its structure, function, and its connections in response to experiences, to learning, and environmental input. Let's dive into the subject of neuroplasticity in detail. It's a little bit nerdy, but this neuroscience is absolutely mind-blowing. Neuroplasticity or brain plasticity speaks about the brain's capacity to change in both structural and functional levels throughout our lives. Importantly, these changes, neuroplasticity, occurs every moment of every day. Neuroplasticity issues are believed to underlie conditions like depression and dementia, and neuroplasticity is also the driver of things like forming new habits or breaking out of unhealthy habits, just generally wiring our brains for better health. Our goal is to direct neuroplasticity for our benefit. And some of the examples of factors that can influence neuroplasticity, both in terms of its directionality and amount, include things like learning, environmental stimulation, injury or diseases, therapeutic intervention specifically around cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and other psychiatric interventions, activity, specifically physical activity, nutrition, sleep, stress, supplements, pharmaceuticals, psychedelics. And we're going to be talking about all of these in detail in this episode. So if you're interested to learn about how supplements or diet and other aspects of our life are rewiring our brains for the better and the worse, and how do we harness that information, stay tuned. We'll get into all of that in detail. When we think about neuroplasticity, it's kind of a complicated subject, but there are two primary types of neuroplasticity. For the sake of this conversation, we'll just cover the basics, but if you'd like more details, I'll attach an article where you can dive into the complex neuroscience of neuroplasticity. For today's conversation, we're going to focus on functional plasticity, which is changes in how our brains function, specifically how our neurons function, and structural plasticity, which involves changes in the physical wiring and the macro structure of the brain. This next little conversation here is going to be about the cellular and the molecular basis of brain rewiring. And again, we're going to get a little bit nerdy here. This is neuroscience, but it's absolutely compelling stuff. And if you've ever been interested in understanding how your brain changes, this is the underlying biology. At the cellular level, neuroplasticity is supported by changes in the strength of the connections between neurons, something called synaptic plasticity, the number of connections between neurons, which includes both the number of synapses, creation of synapses and removal of synapses, as well as the creation of new branches of the end of our neurons. These are called dendritic branches. Additionally, neuroplasticity includes a term called neurogenesis. That is the creation of new neurons. Now, as opposed to other forms of neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, the generation of new neurons, has only been shown to occur in a couple of very specific areas within the human brain across the lifespan, but it does occur all the way through our lifespan. And that is such a powerful reconceptualization of how our brains work that we can create new brain cells, new neurons across our lifespan. One of the key mechanisms, I'd say probably the most important mechanism to understand around neuroplasticity, is the balance between two processes: long-term potentiation and long-term depression. These are complicated terms, but they basically describe the way that our neurons connect in terms of the strength of the connections between neurons. So, long term potentiation strengthens connections, long term depression decreases the strength of connections. In addition to the neuronal and subcellular processes that we just discussed, there are a number of signaling molecules that can significantly impact neuroplasticity. One of the most important of the signaling molecules to understand, and probably the most popular to discuss, is a neurotrophin, which means a molecule that can actually boost long term potentiation. Neurotrophin called brain derived neurotrophic factor. It's part of this family of neurotrophins. Beyond brain derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, small immune molecules called cytokines also influence neuroplasticity by suppressing or enhancing the process of neuroplasticity. Generally speaking, when it comes to the immune system, low levels of inflammatory molecules actually may promote neuroplasticity, but chronic inflammation, chronically elevated levels of inflammatory molecules, seems to impede or suppress healthy neuroplasticity. Neurotransmitters and neuromodulators like glutamate and serotonin also play key roles in neuroplasticity, as well as hormones like cortisol. Again, just speaking as a general topic here, what seems to be the case is that chronic stress, which is characterized by elevation of molecules like cortisol, seems to suppress healthy neuroplasticity. And we'll talk about that in a moment in the context of interventions that can help to decrease chronic stress, like meditation and mindfulness, and why that may help to explain why people who meditate and engage in mindfulness show benefits in their brain that correlate with neuroplastic processes. The diversity of signals that influence brain pathways basically means that every day there are multiple ways that we can tap into and boost healthy neuroplasticity. And that's what we're going to be focusing on for the remainder of this conversation. So let's now pivot into what evidence do we have from human, from animal, from cell-based studies suggesting that we can make changes to our lives to boost healthy neuroplasticity, to influence the directionality of neuroplasticity, so we're wiring our brains for good things, and potentially to increase the total amount of available neuroplasticity. When we look across a range of preclinical and clinical data, researchers show that our lifestyle and other daily choices play a major role in neuroplasticity. The data range from cell level studies showing that, as I mentioned, inflammation and stress hormones may dampen neuroplasticity, to interventional studies in humans showing changes in brain structure and function with things like pharmaceuticals, with meditation, and other tools. With the understanding that our brains are always being rewired, let's talk about some of the practical tools that can help us to shift the balance towards the side of better health. And what I will say here is, it is not to say that you have to do all of these things or necessarily any of these things. This is rather to cover what does the research tell us about how our daily habits, how our daily choices may be impacting neuroplasticity. The first topic we'll get into here is how exercising our brains can actually boost neuroplasticity. A host of studies show that performing moderately cognitively taxing tasks, kind of a mouthful, but basically exercising our brains, can promote healthy neuroplasticity. The neuroscience undergirds the concept that lifelong learning, meaning learning along our lifespan, always committing to learning new things, can help to boost the brain and protect it against cognitive decline. There was visual evidence of the rapid effects of learning on neuroplasticity published in a 2012 study in the journal Neuron, showing that 2 hours of learning led to changes in MRI imaging within the hippocampus. It's proposed that novelty and brain training, something like learning a new language or playing an instrument, can promote enhancements in beneficial neuroplasticity. And interventional data has shown enhancements in memory and processing speed associated with doing targeted brain training tasks. What are we saying? The bottom line is to try to stretch your brain daily with things that use a bit of your brain's cognitive power and maybe make you a little bit uncomfortable because you have to stretch your brain in order to boost neuroplastic benefits. So we talked about here exercising your brain, but number two in terms of things that can help to enhance neuroplasticity is exercising the body. And physical exercise, in particular, anything you can do that is either aerobic or resistance training, is probably the best studied intervention for actively boosting healthy neuroplasticity. Why do I say this? It's because exercise has been shown to demonstrably increase the size of the hippocampus. It looks like it actually boosts the degree of synapse creation and potentially even new neuron creation within the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain. Exercise is also probably the best way to enhance levels of that neurotrophin that I mentioned, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Exercise also helps to suppress neuroplasticity impairing stress and inflammation. But importantly, here, as we're talking about the benefits of exercise, there is a threshold effect. So, moderate levels of exercise, great. But if you're engaging in really intense exercise, there is actually a concern that that could ramp up inflammation and create additional stress in your body. So, there's a difference here between an ultra marathon and doing a 20-minute jog on the treadmill. The bottom line here being for most people, any sort of movement of their bodies, resistance training I would include in this, is a great way to support healthy neuroplasticity. The third way that you can help to augment or improve neuroplasticity, wire your brain for the better, is to engage in mindfulness and meditation. Now, as I've already mentioned, mindfulness and meditation may benefit our brains in part because they have been shown to help to decrease levels of stress molecules and help to decrease the downstream effects of chronic stress on our bodies and our brains, one of which is to suppress neuroplasticity. But mindfulness practices have been shown to enhance functional and structural brain changes correlated with neuroplasticity. Multiple studies have shown changes in the brain associated with engaging in periods of meditation and mindfulness. For example, a 2023 article in Nature Scientific Reports found that mindfulness-based interventions were associated with structural brain changes in the brain's right insula and precentral gyrus region compared to controls. While there are many different ideas here in terms of the best forms of mindfulness, the best forms of meditation, the amount you need to do each day, the way you need to do it, I would say that starting with around a 10-minute daily commitment to any mindful practice is a great way to get started. Okay, let's now jump into food and nutrition. This is always a popular topic. We know that our food plays a major role in changing our brains, and generally speaking, what we know is that a diet rich in minimally processed foods seems to support healthy neuroplasticity, while a typical Western American type diet or a standard American diet or SAD appears to have the opposite effect. Why is this the case? Well, here think we get back to this mechanism, which is inflammation, specifically inflammation in the brain or neuroinflammation. A number of studies have suggested that eating a ultra-processed diet promotes neuroinflammation, whereas eating a minimally processed diet rich in plant-based foods, omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, flavonoids, is something that may help to decrease neuroinflammation. While there's lots of nuance around this topic, and I urge you, if you're interested to learn more about diet, to check out my other content on that topic, a Mediterranean pattern diet, which is a diet that is rich in a variety of minimally processed foods, has been the diet best studied to help to protect against depression, dementia, and other brain-related conditions. And based on what is available right now in terms of the research, I'd say that's probably the best diet for most people to promote healthy neuroplasticity. We're getting some signals around, for certain people, a diet that helps to improve metabolic health. That might be one that is lower in carbohydrates, but generally speaking, for most people, the Mediterranean pattern diet or the variant, the MIND, M-I-N-D diet, are the best studied overall diets for brain health. Okay, let's now jump to sleep. So how does sleep influence neuroplasticity? Sleep is essential for memory consolidation. I think this has been very clearly proven in the research, which is if you don't get good sleep, you're not going to be able to create new solid memories. And you can actually see this for when people are trying to learn for tests or basically cram for tests, that sleep is a dramatic enhancement in their ability to recall information. And for long-term memory, it's also essential. But sleep also seems to be essential for general modulation of neuroplasticity, for kind of a macro sense of regulation of neuroplasticity in the brain. Sleep is, just as an aside, so fundamental for overall brain health, and I think it is the most under-recognized resource that we have available to us to dramatically and consistently enhance our brain health. So if you're concerned about your sleep quality and you've tried the basics, decreasing light exposure at night, decreasing sound in your bedroom, decreasing stress before bed, decreasing caffeine in the afternoon, drinking less alcohol before bed, if these things, these basic tools aren't working, I would say getting a sleep study, seeking additional care are great options, and more people should avail themselves of the benefits of modern sleep science. The next topic we're going to get into, if sleep is a little bit in the mundane, this is going to be the exact opposite, is psychedelics. So psychedelics are nothing like a low-level intervention, but they are one of the most promising new potential interventions for a number of mental health conditions. Why is this the case? Well, many studies now demonstrate that one of the reasons why psychedelics work, and perhaps the most important reason why psychedelics work, is because they have neuroplastic effects. We know from a host of preclinical and animal data that psychedelics have rapid effects on neuroplasticity. What we see in humans, of course, is that if a human uses a psychedelic, there are very quick changes in cognitive state and mental state and brain activation patterns, and this may correlate with the neuroplastic changes. From animal studies, we know that psilocybin promotes rapid neuroplastic effects. We know that there's also data for LSD and DMT. And what I would say here is it's been shown that psychedelics directly bind to the receptor for brain derived neurotrophic factor, but they may also influence neuroplasticity pathways by modulating inflammation, stress, and metabolic pathways. There's lots more to learn about psychedelics and neuroplasticity. I've done a deep dive video and podcast on that topic. So if you Google me or look on YouTube or on my Spotify account, look for the neuroplasticity video with psychedelics, and you can learn lots more. Okay, let's now jump into pharmaceuticals and supplements. So, pharmaceuticals are really interesting because, generally speaking, when you learn about pharmaceuticals, when I learned about pharmaceuticals in medical school and residency, we think about a mechanism of action that's very specific. We'd say, well, this drug works on this receptor and causes this effect. But what we're now understanding is that, especially as it relates to brain focused drugs or neurological or psychiatric drugs, that these pathways are not as explicit as we once thought they would be. Many of the paradigms around how brain active drugs work are being actively challenged by modern research. For example, let's talk about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. We had thought that these drugs, and you would imagine based on their name, that they work specifically by acting on the serotonin receptor. But new research suggests that it may not have anything to do really with the serotonin levels, but instead may rely more significantly on pathways like neuroplasticity. So SSRIs and other antidepressants may work by boosting neuroplasticity in the brains of people with depression and other mental health issues. We're also learning that anti-epilepsy drugs or anti-seizure drugs may have effects on neuroplasticity in different parts of the brain. Beyond direct effects on neuroplasticity, because as I've mentioned, inflammation appears to have many effects on suppressing healthy neuroplasticity when it's at chronic levels, and may actually improve neuroplasticity at low and kind of acute levels. We know that any medication that acts on inflammation within the brain could have effects on neuroplasticity. And that could range from any sort of potent anti-inflammatory drug like a glucocorticoid or a steroid to something like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and over-the-counter that a person might take. Bottom line here is we're understanding in real time that many of the pharmaceuticals that are either prescribed or even over-the-counters that work, we've believed, on other processes may have an impact on neuroplasticity either directly or through some of these other pathways like inflammation. Let's round this out with a conversation on supplements. So there's not as much good data in humans suggesting that supplements directly and significantly alter neuroplasticity, but because of multiple pathways that supplements act on that influence neuroplasticity, certain supplements are worthy of an extra look. When it comes to proxies for neuroplasticity, as I mentioned, BDNF is an important one. Many people will get a sense as to whether neuroplasticity may be modulated by looking at levels of BDNF in serum. So when we look at things that influence BDNF, it's notable that a 2023 meta-analysis of 12 trials found that supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids, and generally speaking, we're thinking of DHA and EPA, but in this study, they also looked at the precursor ALA to EPA. They found that supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids was linked to higher levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, with some data suggesting there were benefits for around 2 grams of supplemental omega-3 fats a day for 10 weeks or less. In a 2022 meta-analysis looking at people with depression, they showed that probiotics meaning these are things that are active bacteria that we can consume. Prebiotics are things that we feed the bacteria, but that probiotic bacteria, specifically lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, was linked to increases in BDNF. Now, notable here is that people with depression tend to have lower levels of BDNF, so this doesn't necessarily mean that we can generalize these results to a healthy population. There's other research looking at additional potential supplements. There's whole coffee fruit extract that may increase BDNF. There's also research around polyphenols. Polyphenols are a host of plant nutrients found naturally in plant-based foods. You may have heard them also referred to as flavonoids or flavanols. But there's some data suggesting that supplementation with polyphenols, as well as consumption of polyphenol-rich foods, is linked to better cognitive function and decreases in neuroinflammation, primarily within preclinical models. In one preclinical paper that was published in 2017 in Nature Scientific Reports, researchers found that dietary polyphenols may cross the blood-brain barrier and help protect the brain against inflammation. We're learning a lot about other supplements right now in terms of how they may act on various pathways linked to neuroplasticity. I've been doing a lot of learning right now on creatine in particular in terms of its metabolic and immune effects. But the bottom line here is, when it comes to supplements, we're primarily thinking about them as working on upstream pathways that could then downstream lead to benefits to neuroplasticity. And we don't have a ton of data just yet suggesting that supplements can dramatically and consistently modulate neuroplasticity in humans, but still lots to learn. Okay, so we've covered 8 of the potential ways that we can modulate beneficially neuroplasticity within our brains with various tools, most of them being lifestyle related. But the bottom line here to understand is that we are always messing with or modulating neuroplasticity. We are always rewiring our brains for the better or for the worse. So at the very least, understand that you have a ton of agency over how your brain is being wired, both in terms of functional and structural setup, that you always have the ability to wire your brain for the better with the choices that you make. And if you're interested to learn more about these types of topics, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. You can also visit my website, www.austinperlmutter.com. Follow me on social media at Dr. Austin Perlmutter for lots of information on these themes, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.